Welcome to File, a monthly conversation for those at the convergence of data privacy, data security, records, and governance. I'm Anthony Goodwood, and today with me is my co-host Chris Brown, our Executive Vice President, President of Presidents, Executive Evangelism, and Executive Solution Engineering President, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. That's getting more ridiculous as we go along. I love it. But thanks, mate. We're separated again. You're in the US and I'm here in Australia. A topic today that we've sort of been touching on a lot this year and near and dear to our hearts in terms of AI, but also especially talking today about agentic AI. And I think anybody who's been listening will have heard us probably, they could play buzzword bingo. We've been saying agentic AI a lot. Before we start, let's define it. I asked ChatGPT this morning for a definition of agentic AI, but I think I like the way IBM summarizes it because it's a little bit simpler, and I'm sure you'll have an IBM joke there for me as well around this. But they sort of stated as, an artificial intelligence agent is a system that autonomously performs tasks by designing workflows with available tools. That's a really simple explanation, I guess. And if we start there today, let's have that conversation. How do you define an agentic AI?
It's funny, I really dislike that definition because that basically says any piece of software that's ever created today. That means everything's agentic already, right? If you were to include that, right? It's
correct.
It's so broad. It's an interesting starting point because it's actually hard to properly define agentic AI. And the reason it's hard is exactly that. In many ways, many of the things we've been talking about around agentic AI is many of the workflows and capabilities we have today. But what it really comes down to is because it autonomously performs, right? A piece of software does autonomously perform something because it's been programmed to do it. The issue is that what we really got to break apart of that definition is it's not programmed to do it. It's been given models and then it makes decisions to do it. And there is a really fine line that I think the average person looking at something will not be able to discern the difference. And in fact, to be frank, there are times where I'm not sure I can discern the difference. And I think I have some understanding of the space.
And I think the reason why I wanted to start simple, and it's a really great point. If I look at the one that ChatGPT gave me as an example, it's very much around plan, act, observe, and adapt. And that's that piece of, well, hang on, I know some stuff, I have some inputs, I understand what you kind of want to do because as you say, you've got a model, there's things there that can help me make decisions. And then over time, I take feedback. And I think, it's like, well done with a patted on the head per se, but it's probably a little bit, it's overreaching, but it's that autonomy piece that the agentic really does play in here. I think if we want to create differences, LLMs, I won't say ChatGPT because obviously there's agents with ChatGPT and other things that it can do now, but LLMs will very much respond to a prompt. It's searching, it's helping you to define things using other models of text and other pieces. For me, the agentic AI is really about the doing things. It's the taking the next step. Hey, I'd like you to help me to understand something and then plan and then maybe even act. And it's the maybe even act piece that I think it's really, really interesting when we sort of say, the simplest of use cases. I'd like you to read and summarize all my email, write me some formal responses, provide me a task list in terms of importance, and I'll work my way through it and get those out to my partner, the suppliers, or other people I'm working with. That's a huge piece of everybody's day, I would have to imagine. I personally use Tool to help me with this as well because I get hundreds of emails a day. Most of them I don't need to read. It's great to get that summary. But using an agentic AI, I'm getting it to do a lot of that heavy lifting for me. It's to making me more efficient. Even talking to some of our graduate developers here at RecordPoint and having them have this conversation about agentic AI, it's really, really interesting that there's a lot of things to unpack here. There's a ton of stuff to unpack.
Yeah, I think for us in the content management world, when we're thinking about governance and risk, to have an agent or a co-pilot or whatever we're describing it as these days, really means that you can assign it a task and it completes that task without further instruction. That's the point you were leaning in there about your email. There are some real bookends to that today. As we've envisaged this world a year from now, maybe it's different. One of the things I've been playing with is having your calendar managed by an agentic endpoint. And man, does that mess up fast. So I played with it.
No wonder I can never get a slot.
I'm sorry, Chris, I've already bungled, I know, some meetings with you. I turned it off because it couldn't cope. The decisions in doing what seems like a simple thing of here are some slots, here are some bookings, I prefer 30-minute meetings and not hours, and giving it those parameters, it still couldn't cope because there are too many decisions. They're obvious to a human, but not obvious at face value, right? If I've got a meeting invitation, I'm sitting here in Seattle, just spending some time in Redmond with Microsoft, but there's travel time in that. The AI agent just didn't understand that happened to be sitting in Redmond. Therefore, there was a half hour that it needed to book around it, and maybe I could give it those rules, but I didn't. So the next meeting I had was booked into a time where I needed to travel back to our office here in Bellevue. There are things that today those autonomous agents can't do well. They will get better at, but I think that notion of autonomy is being able to give it a goal and it being able to complete a task successfully for you.
I want to lean into something that Dave Slutskin, obviously on a previous podcast, he spoke about, which was the reason why we're now really looking at agentic is because it's a way around the limitations of LLM. If you think about that from an evolution perspective, maybe it's part and parcel of the evolution itself. We're defining AI in general. We're trying to get stuff done. We're trying to use the power of computing and the power of modeling. But I think Dave's point was more along the lines of this is the natural evolution. LLMs have been around since 2018, right? Like the ChatGPT 2 and 3, there's been other prompts and things coming out much, much earlier than this wave of media been around it. We're at that GPT-2 level for agentic. It's not able to do the decision handling around the calendar piece. I can't imagine you're the first, but it's not enough information for it to go, well, actually, I need these parameters. As you said, the email, it's probably been done a lot. The parameters are relatively simple. It's not always getting it right, but that's okay. I'm the checkpoint. Calendars is that next piece. I think we've got a real opportunity here that these things will grow and get better. And early crystal ball call from you. Where are we going to be in 12 months? I think it's really, really interesting to see this. This is all about us, and RecordPoint and Filed is about the information governance space. Let's talk a little bit about the information governance agent. Where does that start? I've got some ideas, but where does that start, and possibly where does it go if we pull that crystal ball out again?
Yeah, and I think it does depend how far we're forecasting out, right? In terms of the crystal ball and what we're asking it. If we go to something that's more relatively predictable, 12, 18 months, 2 years from now, the reality is that we will have more connected systems that we can assign goals of activities. So if we talk about information governance, the traditional world, even of records, well, what do we do in record? Well, we create file plans or classification schemes. We apply those file plans and classification schemes to data and classify that data against those file plans and classification schemes, which results in retentioning and potentially other signals. So there's kind of these three elements, right? And then ultimately we'll act on those file plans or classified data to do something with it. Disposal, transfer it, whatever it is out of those source systems. So if we take that theory, sort of information management theory at the recording level, then many of those functions within 18 months can be performed by an agent. Looking at the regulations, looking at the matching of data from a classification perspective, applying the classification inside a system in place, those are capable to be agentified. I think that's a word. I've heard it a lot on podcasts. I think in 2 years, a human in the loop for exceptions and override and control. So it's not really replacing someone who does those functions in the front end of that process, but it is augmenting and speeding up their workflow. On the back end of that process, the disposal element I spoke about, well, that's a more complex process because it isn't just, hey, get some data, here's some rule set, match stuff to the rule set, now let it sit here for a period of time while we watch a counter or maybe an event from an external system. Agents are going to be quite good at that. Once you go to disposal, someone has to appraise the data because they can do a summary, but summaries aren't data appraisal because there's a lot more metadata or context. It's a little bit like managing the calendar again. We've got all these things that are around my calendar event. The single calendar event, not too hard to put in my diary. Is there a blank space? Yes, I can give Chris an appointment, but knowing what's before and after, knowing what the impacts of these things are much harder evaluations for the disposal can be a bit more like that, right? Because we're now going to get rid of data out of the enterprise. We want to think about, well, what came before it, what's after it, what does this relate to? Is this significant today, but wasn't significant when it was created? Those agents, I think 2 years from now in managing just this very simple process of records management are going to be more complex and need more assistance in that world around how humans are inside that loop. And so that's probably a longer time frame.
I like that. I think that's the interesting piece, right? The complexity of the task isn't always obvious. Disposal seems fairly simple on the outside. I've captured the object. It's got a classification. That classification is regularly reviewed per the SME. And there's reporting built into systems, and organizations can do these things regularly. Once that retention comes up, when there's an attestation level decision that's made by a data owner, an executive, whoever that might be in your organization. It's almost a feel, right? Is this information risky? You know, what is it that's in it that from a summary perspective, yeah, AI can help me with a summary, but what is it about it that gives me the confidence to go, let's get rid of things? The disposal's naturally been that piece of work that most organizations have struggled with, because someone does have to make that decision. They're taking ultimate responsibility for that. The whole point of this is I kept it. We made a decision to actively remove it, and then it was destroyed. So that's what I no longer have. Mr. Court of Law when I end up in trouble, or you try to defend a position. It's interesting because under destruction and over retention is the biggest problem in our industry. An agent isn't instantly going to be able to improve upon that for that same reason. But obviously, having the agent be able to do that regular review, having the agent be able to constantly give you that confidence, which should allow organizations to have that attestation be much stronger. And that's where there's a gap today. The gap today is very simple: classification, review, and management. They don't have 100% their environment managed. And it's probably the same problem that we've got on the other side. We've talked about this at length too, about governance around AI and being able to make good decisions about what should go into the models for the same reason. But I think, as you said, in time, that complexity will still be there. The agents will improve their ability to handle that complexity. The question I have for you is, at what point, from a regulatory perspective, do we accept that it's the AI's responsibility here? I know that's the political, legal gambit around AI making decisions, but can an organization ultimately remove that responsibility from themselves? I don't believe they can, but what are your thoughts?
I think they're different things. So removing responsibility from yourself versus using an agent that you make effective through the instructions you give it are slightly different things. I don't know that any organization, in the current parameters we have from the legal system is going to be able to obfuscate their responsibility. But I do think if we take the crystal ball out beyond the 12 to 18 months, the agents will be able to do these things without fail and be better at it than humans. Because there is the other side of this where it's not like it was perfect today. And it won't be perfect with agents either, right? They're going to make mistakes, but they will, when they're dealing with large volumes of things, they are statistically more reliable than humans are going to be in terms of the failure rate eventually. Now, I don't think that's the case today.
About the traceability, right? We're getting back to provenance almost. Right? We really love a good word for our information governance people. It's like, how do we prove that we did what we did and the way in which we did it?
And we've really kind of a narrow use case of the broader notion of what records management is. And I do want to say that because I think it's important to acknowledge so much more to this. And then information governance is even greater than that. The agents being able to carry out an activity like this it does go a little bit back to the definition we talked about earlier, will just become integrated into the business's workflow. And over time, the notion of responsibility will be enshrined in the instructions given to that agent, who will continue to need to be monitored, because that is the responsibility of the organization. Which is no different to having a human do it, because you've still got to monitor the human, right? Like, you can't just assign the task out to, hey, new person, I've given you an employment contract. You're going to do all the things in your job description and you'll always do them great. And I don't need to do anything else. And now the organization's absolved its responsibility. That's exactly the same in this agentic world. They have to be monitored. I think there is a lot of conversation, particularly in the technology world, where people are like, we'll be able to get rid of everybody and agents will do everything. But they just become another player in the team. They will not function without human observability.
That really ties into, I've had a couple of conversations here at the business. We have a mentor program where we talk to our younger staff, and they're involved with the executives inside the organization. One of the graduate engineers asked the question, like, with this push into agentic and the way in which things are moving, I think we spoke about it in the last podcast in terms of, how is the sausage made? And we had a really good conversation about inventors versus consumers. Are we moving to a point where the records management or the information governance different space that very much needs to make a decision about, are they consumers, for want of a better term, the inventors. My comment to because the question was very much, look, I'm a junior developer. Obviously, there's agentic AI that is apparently able to build code at the same level as a junior developer. Now, at what point do I become redundant? And I sort of, the interesting thing for me is if there's a tool out there that allows me to now vibe code and become a junior developer in the team, why isn't it true that a junior developer can just purely be more efficient with these tools? Like, you've already got a set of skills beyond myself. So your prompts should be better. Your ability to pull this together should be better. Should you be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% more efficient? Should a junior developer now actually be able to do more with these tools than Joe average? Like, why isn't that true? Are we getting to that point? It's not so much that we're removing people, but it's now your training, your expertise, your degree, your history, your experience with an agentic AI at your side is now, the equivalent of having multiple team members. We should be more efficient. We should be better. And we should have higher expectations of the level of information governance because of agentic AI.
Yeah. I started my career in a law firm. Now, I'm not old enough to have worked before the internet. I know you're not either, Chris. We talk about old. The weirdest thing ever was walking into an organization, having you learned about and used the internet and had that in my studies. And look, it was the earlier days of the internet. We didn't have all of the tools we have today, but certainly had enough. And the firm had a library. Like, why is this still here? As a junior person working in that firm, who probably 2 years prior to me arriving there, someone would ask you an esoteric case or something, and you would go up to the library, find the book, and maybe it wasn't even in that library. You'd go across the road to, it was in Sydney, to one of the university's law libraries or potentially the state library and pull that data and check it. I didn't have to do that. I would just search Ostley or go search for XYZ, and it was on the internet, and that was just native. And I think we're just at that tipping point when we talk about this tooling, where there's a generation of folk that are just about to walk out of the university, and this agentic piece becomes lingua franca. We're almost like, we're still at the library stage and checking a book and checking the case, versus the next day I went to Google and I found it, and then I double checked it was the right one, and I'd never left my desk.
And I think we had that conversation last week. How is the sausage made with the terminology that we use? It's just part of what they do. They are just consumers. They will just walk in and have an expectation around this. And I think, for those of us who have been in industry for a while, it's not so much scary as it is. It's going to make things better, more efficient and hard. I'm still in awe of the pizza agent. How's that going?
Look, due to user feedback, it's currently offline. I am sitting here in Seattle. My children have decided that they are adult enough to manage their own processes, and it is now actually not in use. So interesting, the agent caused two siblings to communicate more effectively, and they've now taken that back to a human set of processes.
So tell me that wasn't the goal in the beginning.
Look, they may listen to this podcast. I don't want to reveal all the secret too much, but what I am looking at doing, and we were talking about this the other day, for those that are out in the listening community and want their own agent, we are looking to make that an open source project.
Awesome. We'll look forward to the links being posted and some advertising. Maybe we might even have to find a sponsor for that. So we won't choose sides today. We could certainly choose sides. Let's offer some advice. What are the tools that we should be looking at for our own day-to-days? Do you have some examples of you're fond of? They don't have to be plugs, but certainly things that people should be looking at and thinking about, even if it's a matter of getting involved in this space.
I want to hear what yours are too, right? Get too far down, but look, let's go with the top 2-3 that I've been playing with. You have to be playing with ChatGPT right now. Look, that has to be the first one on anyone's list. The beauty of ChatGPT, and you touched on it earlier, is you can actually add agents to it. They've done a pretty good job. In fact, others in the podcast I've had a bias to using Gemini and some of the Google tool set, and it is very good as well. But what I have seen in my playing of late with ChatGPT is their ability to add agents and bring in other content and play with that is very easy. Can do it in Google. It's a little harder. For the average person who's there to go do that, I'd go and play with that for sure. It gives a great walled garden to play in. I think this is all contextualized to what you're doing at any point in time. The second tool it's worth playing with if you want to lean into technology and coding and the rest of it, and to give them a plug, and part of what I built the pizza app in is Lovable, which is a great vibe coding app. There are others out there too, Windsurf and others, but Level's very easy to use and get started with it. If you want to play, go play with that.
I'm probably not as detailed as you in terms of the development pieces, but I have been using for my personal side of things. So again, Gemini, I will give it a plug on the Gmail side. Personal email, I was one of those people that got a Gmail account on the first day. So names and things really, really easy. It's a blessing and a curse. It's really easy to tell people what your email address is. It's the curse that it's really easy for people to guess what your email address is and just send you crap. So that email box gets a ton of work just because it's signed up to everything ever. And so I use the tooling in Gemini to pull all of that out, because I also get my bills there. And I tend to miss them because there's 1,000 unread emails and I don't know which one's a bill and which one's not. Apologies to my local government because I never pay my rates on time. I've been using the bits and pieces from Superhuman as well, trying to play with it on top of my work ones. I've had a little bit, limited success there. Interestingly, the agents in ChatGPT, certainly, I've had a personal account with ChatGPT for a while, but we've also moved more recently to an account here at RecordPoint where I've been starting to play with those. Kids do a lot of stuff, especially with the personal account on ChatGPT. A lot of their, building out a lot of the workflows, especially for my son, we might have mentioned before, an athlete. So meal planning and, understanding his calorie intakes and things. There's a lot of stuff there. He's got a Whoop, which he wears to manage and deal with his recovery. It was really, really, really good at predicting he was going to get sick a couple of weeks ago. Get more vitamin C into it. He's absolutely getting run down. The recovery's not coming back. You could see, you're a parent, you tend to see it, but I had data was telling that this was happening because you're not obviously watching all of his sleep and other things. There's a lot of stuff around the house that we're doing in that space. I've made the house more intelligent. Once upon a time, I broke a geofence with the car and the garage door was open, and then I'd break the geofence leaving the house and the garage door would close. That was always really simple. Just sometimes you'd go for a walk with the dog and forget that you've got your phone with you and you broke the geofence, and when you come back, the garage door is wide open and the house has been wide open for the last 45 minutes while you've been walking the dog. So start having to have it work out that I want the garage door to be opened because I'm in the car, it's connected to Bluetooth, and I've been traveling to these locations, and it's normally this time of day. It's getting smarter. I'm still pulling up to the house and the garage door's not open every single time. So we've got some work to do there with those things. So I'm using Home Assistant and some ChatGPT agent there to start to do those sorts of things. Really, really interesting. But for most, even when we talk to our customers, the interesting things that they come up with, and there's some obvious ones. But more recently, I was talking with someone who's very interested in what we're doing around signaling and understanding PII and other things in the data. And so how do I just have that be dealt with, right? We know that this data shouldn't be in these sources. We've defined these things. It gets seen. We know where we want to quarantine that. Make it move. Don't destroy it, but make it move and take these next steps. And I think as we start to think through those really simple processes, we're going to get more and more complexity around these things. I can't wait to see what it is that the team produces for us, but also what the customers ask for and what they're really trying to achieve with data. It's a really interesting space.
I think there's a lot of confusion is worth separating here about these technologies. Some of the things we're trying to do at RecordPoint is to help smooth out that confusion, and we've got some products coming out that deal with that. The notion of data, I think everybody's gone, oh, look, large language models have built models and they went and indexed the internet and like everything from the beginning of time, and now they answer questions. But that's not really what we talk, when we talk about agentic, yes, it's using some of that knowledge, but it's actually trying to apply a much more narrow set of data. And I'm using the word data here rather than model because I think they get confused between model and data. Without getting too technical, there's a thing called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, which means that you can mix data with a model and make decisions about things. Most of the implementations we're now seeing when we're talking about agentic is using some form of that, right? So to bring back to the context where I think it links to your point, when we're playing with this tool, what we want to do is give the model or the LLM or the GPT or whatever you want to call it, those are all slightly different things in some ways, but for the purpose of today, treat them the same, is give it the information that's necessary to do the task and then help make those decisions. When we talk about the pizza application, it's really simple, right? It's got a simple set of tasks that knows how to communicate with those couple of individuals to then make a choice. One of the things I had the LLM do is then make a recommendation to them. Oh, you both don't want pizza, and now today it's Chinese, and the model's going to make different decisions because it has a memory of those things. But I'm not exposing all of them to that, if that makes sense. And so one of the things I think for the listeners to think about in the adoption of these technologies, particularly in the information governance space, what are the different data feeds your business needs from the data you have and the processes you need to create within these AI agents. And then you can start to think about the constraints that come to this. This looks a lot like building ontologies and classifying data that you've done in the past, because those are linked to the things you've done, that you can apply these things in your own life. So you can look at your own facets of what you do and start to experiment with that and pick your LLM of choice, Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, and they all have flavors of being able to do that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you're hitting on there is that if never, ever before in the history of man, understanding and classifying your data is now just as important as it has ever been. Because even to use a simple example, if we want to, as a business, make good decisions about contracts, what you want to have is a well-classified set of all of the good contracts and bad contracts, classified in such a way that you understand that, so that you can feed that model and help it make those decisions and constantly tell it, this is good, this is bad. That's going to help you to create an agent that can do that work for you, be more efficient for you. It's a very, very simple case. And so I think that understanding the ontologies that we have been building, the understanding of the data that we've been trying to capture, understanding that the organization needs to understand all of its data as now valuable to these processes, be it RAG, be it an LLM, be it a model of some other form. You're now in a place where this is key. I don't think any other time in my career, Anthony, where talking about the positivity of using data in your organization in the right way outside of 4 years. It's been if you don't handle it properly, there will be a fine, there will be a problem, there will be a hack. It's all been negative. The positivity here of the data is now got such value to your business. You need to do the information governance thing.
Yeah, absolutely. For the listeners, it really means you can get ahead of this conversation being in this information governance world, because you already have a lot of the tools that allow you to embrace this change. As I've spoken more recently to a lot of folk in information governance or in the the records management, there's been a little bit of fear, but I think as you start to explain that and unpack how relevant they are to it, the fear quickly goes away. And I'd encourage all the listeners, go sign up, grab Copilot, ChatGPT, start to think about the application of it, the risk inside of it, and how you can help assist the company's business model by driving those things.
Excellent.
So we've talked about a few things, Chris, but I know often in these discussions, you bring up a bunch of legal issues and other things to unpack. You completely comfortable with the application of those things?
I think you solved my problem before, right? Like it's not perfect now. And we have this chase of perfection. I think it's probably the biggest in any sales cycle that we have to communicate with customers, is that even today with AI-based classification and data capture and management, the perception of perfection doesn't exist. We haven't ever had it. I think there's still plenty of challenges. I think I asked the question earlier, the perceived ability to hand off responsibility just doesn't exist. You will never be able to do that. But the reverse is, you can become a consumer of a tool, you can understand what it's doing, you can actually review, and we're back to the process. I think more than ever, we're in this place of have a process, have governance, have review, report, and attest to those things. Know that they're true and accept that there's risk. We've had plenty of guests on this podcast who have said there's levels of risk that you have to accept. You can't spend your way to perfection. Like, you could put in thousands of bodies with the high level degrees in information governance, check every single record in your organization. You might get close to perfection, but humans still make mistakes. So
perfection isn't a goal. The goal is, how can you defend a situation when it occurs to the satisfaction of what's necessary from either regulatory, legislative, or moral or ethical standard, right? And though, whilst harder to put strong financial metrics on, those are organizationals' responsibilities to interact that way. And we see that in the real world. I don't want to call out that there's an airline in Australia that had a bit of a oopsie and leaked a bunch of data. There's a real question about were they investing enough? Was it appropriate for the situation, et cetera, et cetera? Now, that's a privacy breach rather than necessarily a data control breach. But it's those things you want to satisfy when the event happens, because the event will happen. And I think that the piece you want to think about that in this agentic world, because it is a different metaphor to engage with.
And I think interestingly has been the internal things that we've been doing. So in playing with agentic in the space, we've set up things like tools to ask questions, set the teams on it to go, we'll break it. The goal was, there's information hidden in this data set. We don't want you to have access to it. We've provided rules and boundaries toward the agentic AI and the LLM to not return these things. Team, try and fool it into telling you something else. I don't want to call out that I think that there's certainly lots of people out there using tooling for responding and reacting through HubSpot and LinkedIn. I'm sure there's going to be a spate of people trying to trick their agentic AIs into liking, reacting, or responding and gaining advantage. The Instagram style, how do I go viral? If I can trick someone with 1 million viewers into responding or liking, that's going to draw attention to my phone. If that person's using an agentic AI, how do I do those things? There's this loop that goes on where there's the good, the bad, and the ugly that goes on with everything. The how to build a meta mousetrap, as you said, what are the rules that you're putting on it? More recently, some of our LinkedIn posts, I reused things and posted things, got reactions from individuals. And it's like the reaction came so quickly that they can't have possibly have been sitting at their desk and seeing this thing come. It had to have come separate. My evil mastermind is, well, how do I get that person to react more in a way that I don't want them to, just for fun even?
Look, I think this is a subject we at RecordPoint are extremely passionate about, and I think we're going to keep talking about this. I was always interested in blockchain and I found it particularly applicable. At the time, there was a lot of talk about Web3, about how it was going to change how data was stored and how data was going to be. And I was certainly not on that bandwagon. I completely feel differently about the future. This is going to change how we interact with ourselves, with the world, with data at large. Everything is data ultimately. And that's going to impact sort of how we go to work and the things we do at work. But that's really exciting because it doesn't mean that everything's going to be thrown out and different. It just means that we're going to be more effective and hopefully find things more enjoyable in the long run. And I think that the real passion is driving us to go. The beauty is at the center of all of this is data information. And there is a real opportunity to make that so much more effective in the world.
It's super exciting. I can't wait to see what comes next. I can't wait to interact with people and hear how they think. The more we talk about this, the more interesting it gets because everybody's got a perspective. And at the moment, there doesn't appear to be any bounds in what we might be able to do.
But it is really compelling, right, in terms of what opportunities it can present. I'd love to talk more about it, but I think we're probably at the end of today's podcast. Thank you all for listening. I'm Anthony Woodward. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review on the podcast platform of choice. We're on LinkedIn under RecordPoint. Head to recordpoint.com/filed for any of the full filed experiences, including the newsletters and many other assets we have. And if you have any feedback or you're keen to become a guest on the podcast, please hit us up on email at filed@recordpoint.com. Love to hear from you. Thank you very much.